When A Quiet Place released in April 2018, it was like the next big thing for horror movies. While I think Annihilation and Hereditary were much better horror films from that particular year, the breakout of director John Krasinski was certainly one of the better films that came out back then. Given that it was a huge financial and critical success, a sequel was inevitable. And so, here we are 3 years later, and a sequel is upon us as theaters are opening back up more widely across the country. Now, before sharing my thoughts on how this movie turned out, I should say that I'm not inherently against the idea of a successful horror movie getting a sequel. The problem is that most of the time, such movies are made without any ounce of inspiration. Take the trailer for that Escape Room sequel as an example. This is practically the lowest common denominator of cash grabs I've witnessed in the past few years. Those who churned out this product movie do not seem to have any shame or self-awareness for what they've made. The original Escape Room movie was already reaching for a reason to exist, but a sequel is just pushing it.
So what is this?
Some kind of Suicide Squad.
A Quiet Place Part 2, on the other hand, comes from a much more sincere source of inspiration. Although the original creators of this franchise, Brian Wood and Scott Beck, did not return for this movie, writer-director John Krasinski did, and he took full control of both the direction and screenplay, as well as acting as a producer. As such, this movie is his vision. Thankfully, his approach was not to simply replicate the original like a Home Alone 2 type of sequel, but here there was actually a concerted effort to build upon the world and characters established 3 years ago. Aside from its opening that is set at the very beginning of the alien invasion, the film picks up quite literally where the original film left off. And from here, I'm gonna have to raise a very brief spoiler warning in order to share my next thoughts, so skip to this time code if you haven't seen the original and don't want to have certain things ruined for you. You've been warned! So yes, at the end of the previous film, John Krasinski's father character sacrificed himself, and then the surviving members of the Abbott family discover that extremely high-pitched sounds, such as those caused by the daughter Regan's malfunctioning cochlear implant, are a critical weakness of the blind alien creatures. The mom, Evelyn, played by Emily Blunt, then kills their alien assailant with a shotgun blast to the face. In the moments literally following that movie's ending, the story begins, and much of this film deals directly with the aftermath of Lee Abbott's death. What I like about this choice is that since we're seeing these characters right after that tragedy occurred, they're not 100% sure of how they feel. This struggle to reckon with their circumstances is what makes the first half of this movie so interesting to me. After all, in similar fashion to the original movie, each of the characters is granted some sort of personal struggle that the audience can get invested in. Instead of just being another thriller with alien creatures, there are genuine character-building moments and even thematically rich scenes that push the story forward in thought-provoking ways. I think Millicent Simmons in particular is a key factor in that. She's already an extremely impressive actress as is, but here, she gets the opportunity to shine as a hero who is proactively using her situation for the betterment of others. Even with the weaknesses and imperfections which do beset her in her quest, I love that she thinks and acts selflessly because of the knowledge and gifts she possesses, and therefore is extremely easy to get behind as a protagonist. Cillian Murphy's character is a great contrast to her since his motivations clash with hers, and the bond they forge throughout the film makes for plenty of compelling drama over whether humanity is worth saving without having to pull off some cliched narrative about him becoming a replacement father figure. What makes their scenes even more impactful is that they are carried by facial expressions and sign language, which were already strong elements of the original, but are even more pronounced here as greater emphasis is placed on the lack of vocalized dialogue for character interactions. All of the actors do a wonderful job with their physically driven performance work, and I enjoyed seeing how they worked to develop their characters, since the story placed that responsibility quite heavily on their shoulders. Even though the first half is very good from the standpoint of establishing new emotional stakes and building up the characters, the second half is not as good, to put it lightly. Part 2 shares some of the original movie's strengths and weaknesses therein, for it starts out great, and then once things build to the climax, it ironically loses some of that which made it compelling to begin with. I still enjoyed these suspenseful sections of the movie, but there's a notable shift in focus towards set pieces and not so much character development. And if I'm being totally honest, some of these sequences feel as though they happened simply because John Krasinski needed his characters to get stuck in scary situations. Things happen in the third act for reasons that feel forced and fabricated, especially as far as Noah Jupe and Emily Blunt's characters are concerned. It's as though he needed them to be in a specific place in a specific time in order for certain things in his screenplay to work, and the decisions he has his characters make to get to those places don't always feel warranted. It ends up in a third act that has a lot of effective surface level tension, but does little for the story or characters, at least nothing that hadn't already been done in the previous movie. With that being said, I still enjoyed watching A Quiet Place Part 2 from beginning to end. Even though I may have been disappointed by how uneven and contrived the screenplay came across at times, it otherwise gave its actors plenty of chances to flex their skills, and John Krasinski once again did an excellent job directing these suspenseful sequences. He wisely didn't try to repeat the original film and minimizing how much we saw the creatures. Instead, the horror is ramped up from intense, action-packed scenes in which the creatures show more of what they're capable of. Generally, there aren't jump scares, but rather legitimately suspenseful scenes that take advantage of our heightened sensory awareness during the experience. The characters surprisingly get hurt in pretty violent and bloody ways, which results in even more tension as they sometimes cannot hold back screaming, thereby luring the creatures in. Between these fun sequences, as well as the excellent cinematography and pitch-perfect sound design, A Quiet Place Part 2 is indeed worth experiencing in theaters, albeit if you're vaccinated or safely follow COVID-19 safety protocols. The film may be far from perfect, and I think the simplicity of the original made that a better experience overall, but this is a good reason to return to theaters if you've been looking for one. Anyway, thank you for listening to me share my thoughts on this movie. If you liked what you saw here, please consider subscribing to the channel, as well as joining the notification squadron so that you don't miss out on my future videos, especially since I'm planning to make a good amount of them in the next couple of weeks. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great one.